Few know the secret behind Jacob's youngest son. Benjamin was not only the youngest child in a family marked by conflict, he was the symbol of a profound transformation, born in the midst of pain and destined to change the course of Israel. His birth did not take place in a palace, nor in a time of peace. Benjamin's life began amid tears, as his mother Rachel, Jacob's most beloved wife, struggled between life and death. It was there, on the road between Bethel and Ephrath, that a story of loss became the beginning of a divine revelation. Subscribe to the channel and discover curiosities, hidden facts, and profound truths about the characters in the Bible. Turn on the bell and follow each new video. Rachel, exhausted, gave birth to her second son, and with her last strength named him Benoni, which means son of my pain. But Jacob, overcome by even greater pain, that of losing the love of his life, refused that name. With a trembling voice he declared, "His name shall be Benjamin," meaning son of my right hand. It was more than a name. It was a spiritual decision. Jacob chose to turn lament into blessing, pain into promise. Instead of perpetuating the loss, he decided to seal the birth with hope. What few realize is that at that moment Jacob was not just naming a son, he was redefining his family's very destiny. Centuries later, the son of the right hand would become a symbol of protection and divine favor. Jacob's words would echo in prophecies, where the right hand of God would represent power, victory, and redemption. But why would this son, born in the midst of death, become Jacob's favorite? Why would the patriarch's heart among 12 sons be attached to the one he almost lost? There is something mysterious about the love that is born of pain, and the bond between Jacob and Benjamin is the purest portrait of this. Some scholars believe that Jacob saw in Benjamin a reflection of everything he had lost in Rachel, her sweetness, her faith, her beauty, and the last fragment of a love that had accompanied him throughout his life. Others say that the old patriarch saw in the boy an opportunity to start over, a silent reminder that God could still turn tears into promise. What is certain is that from that birth onwards, the destiny of Israel began to move in a new direction, and the son of the right hand would become a key player in a story much greater than he could ever imagine. Before continuing, I want to invite you to comment on which city or country you are watching from. Let's see how far this message is reaching. Benjamin's story begins in a time of transition, both for Jacob and for the nation itself, which was still being formed. Israel as a people did not yet fully exist. It was only a promise in motion, carried in the tents of a man who struggled between faith and memories of the past. Jacob had left behind years of conflict with Esau, escapes, deceit, and reconciliations. Now he walked with his large family toward the land God had promised him, trying to transform a clan into a nation. The tribes did not yet have names, but Jacob's sons already represented something greater than they imagined. Each birth, each name, each blessing carried spiritual significance. From Leah came the sons of resistance and effort, from the maidservants, the sons of struggle and competition, but from Rachel, the chosen woman of the heart, came the sons of promise, Joseph and Benjamin. History shows that among nomadic peoples, the last son was seen as a sign of continuity, a testimony that the lineage was still alive. And in Jacob's case, this took on even greater significance. Benjamin was the only one born in the land of Canaan, the only fruit of a new phase in the patriarch's life. He represented the beginning of an era. At that time, Jacob's family lived among pastures and deserts, erecting altars at each stop. Each place told a story: Bethel, Peniel, Ephrath. Each name recalled an experience with God. And it was in this environment of transience, faith, and loss that little Benjamin opened his eyes for the first time. The birth of a child was always celebrated with joy and gratitude, but this time, the cries of a baby mingled with the tears of a mother's farewell. The contrast was stark, life and death sharing the same space, promise and mourning sharing the same moment. And it is precisely this tension that shapes Jacob's heart. He was no longer the impulsive man who had deceived his brother. Now he was the patriarch who was learning to trust in invisible promises. Canaan was still far from being conquered, and the future of his descendants seemed uncertain. But in that lonely camp, among tents and rocks, the old shepherd understood that Israel's destiny began in small things, in the birth of a boy who bore a name of hope. Benjamin was not just another son. He was a reminder that even in times of pain, God continued to write the story of promise. Benjamin was born between his mother's last breath and his own first cry. Rachel, the woman Jacob loved most, never saw her son grow up. Her death deeply marked the patriarch and defined the destiny of that boy. The scene was tragic and sacred at the same time. On the road between Bethel and Bethlehem, Rachel gave birth with difficulty, and feeling that she would not survive, whispered the name Benoni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob, overcome by a force that mixed faith and despair, changed the name to Benjamin, son of my right hand. And it was in this gesture that the boy's spiritual calling began. The name Benjamin carries deep symbolism. In Hebrew tradition, the right hand represents the side of strength, authority, and blessing. By renaming his son, Jacob declared, consciously or not, that the one born of pain would be a sign of divine favor. He would be remembered not as the fruit of suffering, but as proof that God was still with him, even in mourning. In other words, Benjamin's name was a living prophecy. Pain would not be the end of the story. Growing up without a mother and under the protective gaze of a wounded father was not an easy path. The boy became the center of Jacob's attention, which would later spark tensions between the brothers. But before the rivalry took shape, there was something unique about him, an aura of promise and tenderness, as if God himself had placed a special mark on his life. Some scholars point out that Benjamin's birth in Ephrathah, later known as Bethlehem, was no coincidence. From that land, centuries later, another son of the right hand, the promised Messiah, would be born. It is as if God had been weaving from Rachel's womb a prophetic plot that would unite Jacob's past with the future of redemption. Benjamin would be the silent link between human love and eternal purpose. As the little boy grew up, memories of Rachel remained alive in every gesture of Jacob. He saw in his son the echo of a love that even time could not erase. And without realizing it, the patriarch began to project onto Benjamin the weight of a destiny that surpassed any paternal affection, that of being remembered as the son of consolation, the one in whom the promise would live on. Benjamin grew up surrounded by care, but also by shadows. Jacob looked at him as the last ray of light left by Rachel, and this love, as intense as it was protective, would end up creating a silent distance between him and his other brothers. While the sons of Leah and the maidservants got used to the harshness of the fields and the long days with the flock, Benjamin lived under his father's watchful eye, spared from risks and protected like a treasure. Jacob's favoritism, which had already caused tension because of Joseph, was now repeated, but with even greater weight, because the patriarch could not bear the idea of losing another son to his beloved wife. The brothers noticed. Every gesture from Jacob, a lingering glance, exaggerated care, a word of affection, rekindled old wounds in the heart of the family. Joseph had already been sold, and the guilt did not go away. Benjamin, the new favorite, became a living reminder of the mistake they had made. One can imagine the atmosphere in the tents, silent glances, restrained words. A young man who did not understand the reason for so much reserve around him. He was loved too much by his father and tolerated too little by his brothers. But the real conflict was not only outside, it was inside. Benjamin inherited a home marked by loss, guilt, and secrets. He grew up hearing his mother's name whispered like a lament, seeing his father remember the past with distant eyes. From an early age, he learned that love and pain could go together, that blessing and wound could inhabit the same home. And this silent learning would shape his character for the future, a discreet man, but essential in decisive moments. There was, however, something different about him. Benjamin carried a rare sensitivity, an ability to unite without speaking, to calm without imposing. He was the opposite of Joseph, the dreamer, and of Judah, the impulsive leader. He was the gentle link that kept Jacob breathing hope, and the family, though wounded, united around the memory of Rachel. But the protection that surrounded him would not last forever. Destiny and God's plan would soon place him before what Jacob feared most: the risk of loss. The son of the right hand would be taken to Egypt, and there, amid tears and trials, his role would prove greater than any father's preference. If this content is touching your heart, you can support this project by donating any amount by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. Your support helps me continue to tell these stories with dedication. Time passed and famine came. Canaan was dry, and old Jacob, now called Israel, saw his sons leave for Egypt in search of food. All but one. Benjamin remained at home, kept as the last remnant of love and hope. His father repeated, his voice marked by the memory of pain, "My son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left." For Jacob, losing Benjamin would be like losing Rachel all over again. But fate and divine providence do not bow to human fear. In Egypt, the powerful governor who controlled the wheat demanded something unexpected: that the brothers return with their youngest brother. They did not know that this man was Joseph, the brother they had betrayed, now clothed in glory. The demand to see Benjamin was more than a test of loyalty. It was the beginning of a divine revelation that would connect the past to the present. The tension in Canaan was immense. Reuben tried to convince his father, offering his own life in exchange. Judah later took the lead, promising to protect the boy. But nothing broke Jacob's resistance until hunger struck, and the old patriarch, with tears in his eyes, murmured, "If so, may Almighty God grant you mercy before that man." It was at that moment that he handed over Benjamin, and with him he also handed over the last thread of control over his destiny. The journey to Egypt was more than a geographical crossing. It was spiritual. Benjamin, now a young man, unknowingly carried the weight of the reunion between brothers, the forgiveness that God had quietly prepared. When Joseph saw him, the biblical text describes a moment of deep emotion. His heart was moved for his brother, and he wept in his chamber. There, two sons of Rachel were reunited, one marked by loss, the other by longing, and the love of an absent mother seemed to revive in that restrained embrace. What no one saw was what was happening in the unseen. God was using the quietest of the brothers to heal an old wound. Benjamin did not say much. He did not need to. His presence was enough to restore what envy had destroyed. History was moving again, and the son of the right hand became the thread of reconciliation. The reunion between Joseph and Benjamin was not only familial, it was spiritual. The presence of his younger brother triggered a series of events that would change the destiny of Israel. When Joseph saw Benjamin, something broke inside him. Years of pain, longing and disguise dissolved into tears. At that moment, the powerful governor of Egypt ceased to be just a man of authority and returned to being the son of Jacob, the boy who had been sold and betrayed, now standing before his only innocent brother. Benjamin became the focal point of the whole story. Without knowing it, he was the instrument God used to unite what sin had separated. When Joseph called him to the table and served him a portion 5 times larger, he was communicating something deeper than privilege. He was declaring forgiveness and reconciliation. It was as if he was saying, "The love that was divided is now multiplied." The brothers, who had previously competed for attention, now had to face an invisible mirror, the reflection of their own mistakes. And it was precisely the figure of Benjamin, the youngest and purest, that led them to repentance. Joseph's final test, when he hid his cup in Benjamin's luggage, revealed this clearly. They could have abandoned their youngest brother, as they had done with Joseph. But this time, Judah stood up and offered himself in his brother's place. The circle was complete. The love that had once been corrupted by envy was now purified through surrender. When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive, he not only regained a son, he regained his faith. The news brought back the sparkle to a man who had lived for years carrying the weight of grief. And Benjamin, without raising his voice, without making a heroic gesture, was the pivot of this whole transformation. His mere presence was enough to awaken forgiveness in Joseph, redemption in Judah, and hope in Jacob. It is curious to see how God works in silent characters. Benjamin hardly speaks in the biblical narrative, but his life cries out a powerful truth. God's forgiveness often comes through those who do not seek prominence, but carry purity of heart. The son of the right hand did not conquer kingdoms or raise swords, but he sustained with his existence the restoration of an entire family. Behind Benjamin's serenity was a world of silence. He had grown up as the most protected of the children, but also the loneliest. The loss of his mother, the distance from his brothers, the weight of his father's memories, all of this accompanied him like a discreet shadow. Jacob loved him tenderly, but that love was laden with fear, and to live under someone's fear is also to live imprisoned by it. While his other brothers learned to deal with the past, Benjamin lived trapped in his father's present. He was the son who could not make mistakes, who could not take risks, who could not be free. The affection that surrounded him also isolated him. And it is possible to imagine the silent pain of this young man who, even though loved, grew up surrounded by absences, without a mother, without close brothers, without the lightness that childhood should have. Benjamin carried the weight of an emotional inheritance, an unspoken pain, inherited from Jacob's tears and Rachel's memory. Some scholars suggest that this relationship of dependence between father and son prolonged Jacob's suffering. The patriarch, by protecting him too much, prevented Benjamin from experiencing the purpose of his own existence. It was as if, in trying to preserve the memory of Rachel, Jacob also kept alive the pain of her loss. And Benjamin, though blameless, became the guardian of an ancient sadness. But the hidden pain was not Jacob's alone. Benjamin also felt the emptiness left by Joseph, the brother he had only heard stories about. He had grown up with echoes of love and absence, hearing Joseph's name spoken with reverence and mystery, not knowing whether to admire or mourn him. When he found him again in Egypt, he may have realized how much his own life had been shaped by a past he did not choose. Benjamin's heart represented a kind of suffering that cannot be expressed in words, the pain of those who live in the shadow of others' love and expectations. He loved his father, but he also needed to free himself from him. And it was only when Jacob, old and exhausted, let him go to Egypt that the cycle of control began to break. There, without realizing it, the son of the right hand took his first step toward his own freedom, a freedom that began in the heart. When Jacob finally allowed Benjamin to leave for Egypt, something profound happened, not only in history, but in the patriarch's soul. For the first time, he surrendered what he feared most to lose. That simple act of letting his son go was actually a gesture of faith. Jacob, who had so often tried to control his own destiny, learned to let go of the reins and trust God again. And it was this surrender that opened the doors to restoration. In Egypt, Benjamin's journey became a symbol of silent redemption. He, who had grown up surrounded by loss and overprotection, became the instrument of healing among brothers. No speeches, no glory, no rebellion, just being who he was. Benjamin's presence reminded Joseph of lost love, and at the same time of the necessary forgiveness. And it reminded the other brothers of the weight of what they had done, and how much they needed to change. The son of sorrow now brought reconciliation. The son of the right hand was the living sign that God still upheld his promise. The family reunion was more than emotion. It was liberation. Joseph revealed his identity, and all of Egypt was moved by the weeping of those broken men. In the midst of that scene, Benjamin remained silent, perhaps not understanding the magnitude of what was happening, but he was the balancing point, the heart that united the wounded past with the restored future. When Jacob saw his sons returning with news of Joseph, something inside him revived. The man who had once said, "Everything is against me," now declared, "It is enough for me that Joseph, my son, is still alive." Faith, which seemed buried under years of sadness, resurfaced. And it was the presence of Benjamin, the one he feared losing the most, that became the channel of that hope. Overprotection gave way to trust. Pain gave way to gratitude. And love, which once bound, now set free. Benjamin's story is not one of victories won by force, but of hearts healed by surrender. Jacob's true redemption did not come through a spectacular miracle, but through the courage to let go of what he loved most. God restored his home when he decided to trust again, and used the quietest of his sons to prove that faith always overcomes fear. Time, which so often robbed Jacob of what he loved, now gave it back to him in the form of peace. The reunion with Joseph and Benjamin's presence marked the end of a long journey of loss and promise. In Egypt, the old patriarch contemplated his reunited family and recognized that, despite the pain, God had led everything to perfection. Among his 12 sons, Benjamin remained by his side, discreet, faithful, constant. It was as if the memory of Rachel remained alive every time his father looked at his youngest son's face. The years passed, and Benjamin's tribe grew. Small in number but powerful in significance, it carried the heritage of tenderness and bravery. Centuries later, this same tribe would give rise to men of singular courage, such as King Saul, the first monarch of Israel, and much later the Apostle Paul, who would introduce himself as a Hebrew of Hebrews of the tribe of Benjamin. From the youngest of the sons would come one of the greatest messengers of the gospel. It was as if God, from Rachel's womb, had designed a destiny that would span generations. In Jacob's last days, when he blessed his sons, he reserved a mysterious and prophetic word for Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. This blessing, though poetic, carries a double meaning. Benjamin's wolf is not a symbol of destruction, but of vigor, of someone who faces the day with strength and ends up sharing what he has conquered. God showed that even though he was the youngest, his descendants would be marked by boldness and the ability to restore. When Jacob left this world, Benjamin was there, alongside Joseph, saying goodbye to the father who had loved him so much. Perhaps at that moment he finally understood the weight and purpose of the name he bore. Son of my right hand was not just a title of paternal affection, but a prophecy of favor, protection, and continuity. Benjamin would be remembered not only as the youngest son in Jacob's house, but as a living sign that God transforms tragedies into fulfilled promises. The life that began in tears now ended in peace. Jacob rested with a healed heart, and Benjamin, the son of consolation, remained as a reminder that God's last word is never loss, it is always redemption. Benjamin's story is proof that God transforms pain into destiny. The boy who was born amid tears became the symbol of consolation and restoration. The father who once called him son of the right hand perhaps did not imagine that centuries later God himself would be revealed in his son, seated at the right hand of the Father, a sign of power, victory, and eternal love. Benjamin was more than Jacob's last son. He was a divine reminder that the deepest pains can produce the most powerful promises. When we look at Jacob's journey, we see a man who learned at great cost the difference between holding on and trusting. He held on too tightly to what he loved and lost it. But when he finally surrendered what he feared losing, God gave it back to him in abundance. Benjamin was the instrument of this learning. Through him, the patriarch discovered that true love does not imprison, it sets free. And that genuine faith is not trying to control what we love, but resting in the hands of the one who rules all. The tribe of Benjamin, though small, became a symbol of bravery and faithfulness. From it came warriors who defended Israel, and later an apostle who would change the history of the Christian faith. Paul, a descendant of this tribe, knew well the weight of the name he carried, and also experienced the grace of being transformed by God's love. Like Benjamin, he too was surrounded by divine mercy and used to unite what was once separated. On a spiritual level, Benjamin's birth teaches us that all pain that passes through God's presence can be renamed. What began as Benoni, son of my sorrow, became Benjamin, son of the right hand. And this name change was not only symbolic, it was prophetic. God was showing that pain is not the end point of his promises, but the starting point of something new. Perhaps like Jacob, many still struggle between the fear of loss and the desire to trust. But Benjamin's life reminds us, when we surrender what we love most into God's hands, he transforms loss into purpose, tears into testimony, and mourning into legacy. The son of sorrow became the son of blessing. And to this day, his story whispers an eternal truth. God never wastes a tear. He turns them into fulfilled promises. If you enjoyed these curiosities and discoveries about Benjamin, get ready. There are still many secrets hidden in the pages of the Bible that few know about. Enjoy this video, share it with those who love stories full of faith and mystery, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next surprising revelations about the great biblical characters. Together, we will discover the details that the Bible holds for those who seek a deeper understanding.